Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after 1,169 days of sitting inside the top 8, the Demons have been unceremoniously dumped out of it after an insipid performance in Alice Springs against the Fremantle Dockers. Joining me tonight to dissect our worst performance since 2016 is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
I'm not sure it's all that good an evening after that weekend, Andy, but good evening. Good evening also to our very brave listeners tonight. We'll see what we can do for you. I'm not sure that we can do much. I'm still at the anger stage of the 7 stages of grief of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross after that performance on the weekend. I think there has been an almighty cock-up that we witnessed the outcome in this particular game, but we'll get to talk about it during the night.
Well, I'm not sure which stage of grief I'm in. It's not denial. What are the other ones? Pain, guilt, anger and bargaining, depression.
Acceptance.
No, I'm not even acceptance yet. No way. I'm probably in the anger and bargaining.
I'll go to the anger
and bargaining for tonight. Also joining us tonight, let's see what spin our positive Binners puts on it. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, the 3 Demonlanders out there listening, 2 of which are probably hoping to see what spin I'll put on it, Andy. And I don't know if you've ever had a counselling session or ever done counselling, Andy. I have. And you've rocked up for your counselling session and you're not really sure what you're going to talk about. And you know you're just going to pay them money anyway, but you're not really clear what you're bringing to the room. Well, that's how I feel now for tonight's show. So there was a real positive about the Sunday. Negative of the Sunday is having to wait the whole weekend for the game. The positive is that you know that you've got a Sunday game to look forward to at 1 o'clock. The negative is having to do a podcast about said football match, touch over 24 hours later. So I don't even know where my head is at the moment, but it was a shocker, wasn't it? That really good thing I've got a sort of build up scar tissue from the 70s and from the 80s, and I've seen a lot of big losses. That's the worst loss for me since, I forget, is it 16 with the Roos loss when we lost by 100 odd points in, was it his second last game or last game?
Yeah, last game, correct, I think.
Yeah. Last game, like that. See you around, Roosy. It's like, and I knew even at the beginning, like 6 or 7 minutes in, after that sort of first 6 or 7 minute period, that next 6 or 7 minute period, I went, something's not right here. Is some of those kicks, some of the efforts, the body language was all over the shop. It did occur to me, though, that we can add another condition to our list of conditions in which we cannot play well in. So we've got rain, we've got humidity, we've got wind. We can't do wind. And I'm going to add spongy grass to the mix. I think that's really underestimated the impact of that spongy grass.
Come on, they had no problem with that. But yeah, I understand that, but that's not good enough.
Flood. It was still wet, and I mean, come on.
Yeah.
No, I meant the talk about it being spongy. So
yeah. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's get into our other stuff. Some housekeeping. So each week I do put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out. Leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We do love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who have taken the time to provide these 5-star reviews, and we give them a shout out on the show. So Ben writes, great podcast, great when we win, and they always find a glimmer of hope when we are losers. Well, thanks for the feedback, Ben, but unfortunately it was a bad week for you to write that, which you did before the game. But
unless you find the glimmer of hope in the word hopeless.
So I'll leave it to positive Binners, but it sounds like we're not even going to get any positivity out of Binners tonight. So, but keep the feedback coming, and we will give you a shout out on the show. As always, if you follow us on any of our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, leave us some feedback, post a comment on our podcast post each week, and or you can slide into our DMs and we will answer any questions or comments that you have from there. We are also available on YouTube as well as Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud. So search for us in those locations. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum at Demonland, it's an absolute riot.
Don't go there now.
It's an absolute riot.
Announcement. Don't go there now.
It's an absolute riot when we lose. So you'll love it if you are into I don't know, what's the word?
Sort of football-related masochism.
Masochism,
That's very niche. Don't Google that either.
Yes. So head on over to demonland.com. You can sign up. It's absolutely free, and you can talk about all things Demons, whether we win or lose. And sometimes it's even we get more people there when we lose. So that's good for business. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, give us a call on 0390163666, 0390163666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when there is a break in the conversation during the week. Give that number a call. You can leave us a message. We've got quite a few to play on the show tonight. If you're listening to us live, come join us in the chat room. Lots of fun there, demonland.com/podcast. We are live every Monday, except for next week, where we'll be live on Tuesday because we're going to be playing on King's birthday on the Monday. So we will be live on Tuesday heading into the bye. Let's get into the match review. There's not a lot of match review because we've got a lot of vox pops from our posters at Demonland. But the D's burst out of the blocks in Alice Springs and had piled on 2 goals, 1-0 within the first 7 minutes of the game, and Demon fans were feeling very confident that third place would be theirs for the taking by game's end. And fast forward a couple of hours and the demolition was complete, except that the hunter had become the hunted and a number of records had been smashed to pieces in the process. The D's 92-point defeat is the club's biggest under coach Simon Goodwin. Freo's scoreline of 22 goals, 9 behinds, 141 is the highest score conceded under Goody's tenure since he took the reins in 2017. And by the time the match was over, the team was sitting outside the top 8 for the first time since the 2021 Premiership season began. And by the end of the round, instead of third place on the ladder, the D's were languishing in 10th place. Now, we had quite a few general comments that didn't quite fit into any one category of topic because most of them were just comments. Understandably, there's a lot of anger and frustrating and venting and a couple of people gloating with some I told you so's and dancing on the grave of our failed dynasty. So I'll read them out so that we can take the temperature of the room at Demonland. And spoiler alert, we're in sub-zero areas there. So Newport 34 writes, I'm all ears, bin man. Put a positive spin on that one. At the break of Gorm writes, where to start? A playing group that looks confused with this game plan. No effort by the coaches to stem Freo's kick mark ball movement. Goody basically had the headsets off after half-time. And for the love of God, please put some heat on this midfield that the Dockers waltz out of the stoppage all game. I had thought we were one of the most reliable footy teams that performs to a standard week in, week out. I have no confidence in this club anymore and what they stand for. And Scroll says, I don't even know where to begin with fixing this. This was the most embarrassing game that I've seen the D's play since Mark Neild. Is the problem the midfield, the forwards, our defence? Is it the game plan? Is it the coaches? It's so deflating. We'll get some answers to that a bit later. Clintosaurus says, sorry, lads, this may be the first one I won't listen to since I started in 2018. And what say what says 3 losses out of 4 games and the team looks bereft of confidence and the ability to put pace on ball movement. How do we turn that around? And Oh My D says, are the expectations of this team in excess of what they can possibly deliver this season? While flags are never won in June, the gap between our best and our worst has widened measurably this year compared to 2021, 22 and 23. Flower Magic writes, gentlemen, I have only one request. Please limit your broadcast to a maximum of 15 minutes or I, like Clintosaurus, will give it a miss this week. All we need is 5 minutes or less on the game. 5 minutes on changes and 5 minutes on Casey. Having sat through that horrible game, I do not wish to hear it dissected over an extended podcast. Doug Reamer says, I left a voice message after the Eagles game and was smugly dismissed when I stated that we'd be lucky to make top 4 this year. Good luck explaining this result. Time to wake up and smell the roses. This era is over. If you can't see it after today, I'd like to order a pair of the rose-coloured glasses the podcast panel is wearing this season. Dino Rover writes, can we put to bed to please some time-honoured demon homilies? Number 1, we are in the premiership window, but we go out in the finals in straight sets. Number 2, we have a great midfield. We have some great midfielders, but we are slow on transition and weak on clearances, particularly centre bouncers. Number 3, big losses always explained by loading. Number 4, can we get by without real ruck relief for Max? Number 5, we are a young team, yes, but not in some key position roles. Ruck Max, key backs, May, McDonald, key forwards, Big Benny Brown. Number 6, we can win a flag in 2024. Number 7, we will revert to finals winning style, not the red and blue print come finals, switching game styles. Let's face the music, try some young players and have a clean out of the not quite right cadre we have collected. Lefty says, kudos to you guys for being able to front up and do a podcast tonight given the insipid performance. Saw a post on Twitter by a guy who calls himself Footy Degenerate. His post is a pretty good summation. The Malice Springs disaster, he starts. First of all, hats off to Fremantle, played the game right, too quick, too skillful and too efficient. Well done. Now for the Ds. Aberration, mulligan, no. Every loss has been a thumping and a concern in one way or another. There's a pattern. We haven't had a 4-quarter performance all year. Today was the first time a team punished us rightfully on the scoreboard for 4 quarters. Our game plan doesn't suit our squad. We don't have the skills to play it. The boys haven't bought into it. We are turning it over in defence and centre square, and our defence has been under siege as a result. I've said all year that McQualter has offered nothing. I'm not seeing any of the Richmond chaos ball. Stafford hasn't improved our forward line cohesively or individually. Both have a lot of work to do. Our wins haven't been convincing. Bulldogs, they had their chances. Hawks, they were awful. Port, they should have won. Crows didn't take their chances. Tigers, we were awful. Cats played one very good quarter. And Saints, they were gross. None of the boys have improved on 2023 form, none. And with 16-plus players under 30, that's a concern. Actually, T-Mac has, but it's his last or second last year. Without Max, Lever, May, or Track, we'd be in an awful spot. How we took a game plan that worked and could easily have gotten us to a prelim in 23, bar awful finishing, and turn it into an inept game plan is beyond me. There were 0 red flags on our game plan, just our forward line setup and goal-kicking accuracy. Absolute overreaction from our coaches. Yet here we are, easy to play against, no mongrel, no confidence in what they are doing, little belief and stuff all depth. Ask opposition coaches, how are you guys going to go against Track, Viney and Clary? Well, inside, opposition coaches are loving it because they aren't the 2021 to 2023 versions of themselves. It's a broken system with broken confidence and morale. On the field and in the stands. Richmond got spanked in 2017 by St Kilda in a similar fashion and went on to win the flag. They ensured that it made them and didn't break them. Can the Ds do something similar? Only time will tell. They've got the cattle, but the farmer has to make some changes, otherwise their season will be roast beef in a few weeks' time. D Positive writes, depressing and interesting. I will try and catch the podcast. The first 4 minutes, the red and blue side dominated, then cute handballs, silly overuse and the usual umpiring failures led to turnovers and loss of structure. As the Dockers' confidence grew, aided by umpire protection, the Demons' skill level failed under pressure. Handballs and kicks that fell short or off target seemed to benefit Dockers' opponents on their own. Picking contests where we were outnumbered seemed to be the desired delivery. There was never any apparent coaching response to the most simple arts of the game. Tag an opponent and man up. Good luck with any analysis. I think a kick up the arse is needed for some players. Our best is still very good, but our worst, like yesterday and against the Eagles, is diabolical. Now, we've got a couple of voicemails to play and then you guys can give some general comments or answer any particular points that were flagged in this Vox Pops. So Binman, followed by George after the voicemails. We've got 3 coming up. And here's Salty.
Boys, Salty here. What a horrible, horrible game. This season's been surprising to me, and the chasm between our good and our bad. I find it hard to understand how we can stink it up against West Coast, come back, look really good against St Kilda, pretty much bruise-free footy, and then go to Darwin or Springs, and it's looked that horrible. hard to reconcile. And then, my friend and I were doing maths on who would come in, and we just don't even know. We haven't got that depth. No one in Casey is really putting their hand up to come in. So I really think we need to reevaluate where we're at this season. I don't think it's going to be a season we're going to do a whole lot in with. Still think Petty is as good as an inflatable tube man. He's done nothing again. And what has gone on McAdam? Like another set shot from 35 metres doesn't make the journey. He's not up to it, but I don't know who else can come in. Howe's look good, but that's all we've got. What a depressing way to finish the weekend. Cheer me up, please. Bye.
We'll try to do that in a moment. Here's Rose Star.
Hey, guys. Tough week. It's Rose Star here. I've just been sitting in front of the TV for about the last 3 hours with my eyes glazed over just at the lack of seemingly effort, enthusiasm and want for the contest. Got absolutely dominated everywhere, and don't know if that L word's coming in yet, bin man, with loading, but they looked flat, they looked unenthused, and did not want to be there. So a really poor showing. The centre of Australia. So really looking forward to Monday night. Like I said, it's about 4:30 and the game's been finished for 45 minutes and I've been sitting there staring into the distance. So as I'm sure a lot of you others are. So, look forward to a huge Monday night potty, guys, and looking to hopefully get some solace. But, just interested in your guys' thoughts of what went wrong today. Just didn't really have a winner over the ground anywhere, I don't think. So, anyway, thanks, guys.
And just finally, before you jump in, Bin Man, we've got good mate Enzo.
Hello, guys. What a great performance by the team. Oops, sorry, wrong week. That was last year. Sorry about that. I don't know, Bin Man. How can you explain such a performance? Maybe everybody's right. The culture is no good. Where were the leaders? No one. Why hasn't players like Sparrow? They're overrated. None of them are any good. None of them have stepped up this year. If it's not Oliver, Petrarca, Gawn, who's going to stand up? No one's standing up anymore. It's just unbelievable. And the season's over. Sorry. This team just is no good. No contest, no will, no care for the ball. Do they even care, these lot? Everybody's going to come after us this week. Gary Lyon will say, oh, the culture's no good. The Ox will come out and go, yeah, I told you, they're all on whatever. What's wrong? Anyway, good night, be happy, and maybe the D's might do something. Bye-bye.
Never heard Enzo lost for words. So, Bim, anything you want to address?
Speaking of counselling, I think I might have to make a rush appointment tomorrow. Doc, I think my depression's flared up. Look, as I said, it was a woeful performance. There's no way of sugarcoating it. But, I think people need to get a bit of a grip, to be honest. I get it. I feel the anger. I feel the pain as well. But, things like the season's over, rebuild. I've been talking about this for weeks and weeks all season. There will be lots of crazy results this year. There already has been. The Cats getting flogged by whatever it was by Gold Coast. 160 points Gold Coast scored in that match. They'll still make the 8, the Cats. I think this is a spoiler alert for a lot of my answers that are coming up, is that you can forget the discussion about the game plan. You can forget the discussion about the midfield. You can forget the discussion about the forward line. You can forget the discussion about Goodwin. All of those discussion points aren't relevant for this analysis of this footy match, because if you turn up with that level of effort in any sport, but in an AFL level, at the elite level, I forget which the caller was, the second to last caller, or maybe both Soldy and the previous one, flat, completely uninterested. The body language was poor. If you put in that level, it doesn't matter what game plan you've got, doesn't matter who is playing in your midfield, doesn't matter who is playing in your forward line. That was such an insipid performance that it means there's no value in sort of discussing the other stuff. Any discussion about the game plan is predicated on an assumption that everyone is applying AFL level effort. And that's not what happened in this footy match. So really, it's, to be honest, that's, as I said, it's a spoiler alert in terms of a lot of my responses to the questions about midfield and all the other questions, is that if you turn up and only have 70% effort level and, you know, your head's not in the game, that's what's going to happen. We were lucky it wasn't, it sounds nuts, we were lucky that wasn't a bigger margin, although they were incredibly accurate. So all power to them. And what was really interesting is right from the get-go, Freo could sense it, and they stretched us as wide as they could, as hard as they could. Even the commentators were talking about it. Some of the decision-making was appalling. Some of the effort levels were appalling. The body language was appalling. You know, we'll unpack some of the reasons later, but I just think there's not much value. You know, when you're down 42 contested possessions, there's not much value talking about, well, the game plan, because whatever game plan you bring, if we were down 42 possession with the game plan that we've used in 20, 21, 22, 23, or 21, 22, 23, we get smashed by 90 points as well. You know, it's so I just caution people to sort of not read to, you know, particularly if you've got a hobby horse and one of your areas is, you know, we should have traded in, or, you know, the game plan, this isn't the game to hang your hat on that, because, you know, you can't assess that performance given the effort level that was put in. But I'd also just caution people just to, you know, take a step back from the ledge a little bit, because, you know, is that as bad as the result was, as I said, there's already been 6 or 7 strange results this year. There won't be too many more than that one. That was a horrible performance. But, you know, as I said, if you come into an AFL game with that sort of approach to it, you're going to get towed up by most teams, particularly a team who's fit, firing and running over the ground like Freo were, and they deserved a 100-point victory. We were lucky not to be beaten by 100 points plus. You know, it was, as I say, the most disappointing performance since that 2016 disrespectful game, effort that the players put in for Paul Roos in his final game.
George, anything you want to add before we get into
only a couple of things. That was, for me, that was the worst game that I have seen this club play since the Mark Neal days, which was what Scroll was pointing out. There was a couple of things which I thought were really telling that the commentators made, particularly in the last quarter. Jordan Lewis and Nick Del Santo, I've got time for as commentators compared to the other nuffies who populate the broadcasts. One of the comments in the last quarter was noting that Petrarca was really serving it out to other people on the field for
which he never does,
which he never does. And what he was doing was telling them to either move up the ground or put in the effort to get, because he was doing the chasing, he was doing the running, and the others weren't. Now that
3 players he was trying to corral, and that exact play when they mentioned that he was trying to sort of get 3 players moving towards their spots.
Yep. And what that tells me is those other players either couldn't or wouldn't do it. Now, if they couldn't do it, it's because there's been an almighty cock-up with our training and fitness program. If they wouldn't, there's been an almighty cock-up with our coaching staff.
I reckon somewhere in the middle.
Take it either way. There's a lot to be found out this week in particular. If it's the first case, there was a great article in The Age during the week about the injuries. We spoke about this last week and the effects that it's having on players in this season. And there were some fabulous comments from Libby Birch, who's a physiotherapist, but also a captain of our women's side, about how clubs are having to change the way that they're getting people to the peak condition. The loading situation was definitely the go in previous years that Bin Man's spoken about consistently. But the other factor that she noted was, Geelong rested players to be able to make sure they were good by the end of the season. What she suspects and was written in the article was that it's going to have to be managed in season because we've got 5-day breaks. We've got 24 rounds of football. Players are being expected to do a lot more than they ever were before. And the injuries are mounting up. So you're not going to have the opportunity to load like you were before.
The game is getting, even in the last 2-3 years, I'd love to see some data because you can't get the GPS data, is how many, my assumption is they're running further. Collectively they're running further. We probably can't find that. And it is just ridiculously aerobically demanding the game.
Yeah, and previously it used to be, Langdon had run 16 kilometres while other people are now having to run 16 kilometres in the game. The upshot of it all was, and it was highlighted, very early on in the game, when you've got people like Bowie and Salem and May kicking short, it's because they haven't got the strength or the fitness at that particular point, or they've been ground into the ground with training to be able to make the distance.
Targets as well.
Missing that was the point. Yeah, they're just simply not making the distance. Freo wasn't the conditions on the ground. We looked like we were flat out tired.
Exactly.
So I know people are going to come back at Bin Man about the loading, but my question is, have we cocked up the way we've been preparing for this season? Let's wait and see on that one. The other thing is the coaching. Again, it was noted by the commentators, and they said at no point was there a change to the way the game was being run.
That's not entirely. They put Tommy Mack. They swapped.
No. That's what they talked about. It's changing the magnets around. Yeah. There was no change to the way the game was being played. Fremantle were playing the way they always play, and we weren't reacting to it. There was their typical chip and hold, and we didn't have the players up in their face like Collingwood did the previous week and really brought them under.
That's because we just, for whatever reason, we didn't. That requires the players to be in the right headspace for elite level football. If they're not, you can do whatever you want. That's the thing. Credit to the Pies for pushing up and playing through that injury stuff. That shows good mental strength. Just because you could argue fitness is part of the equation doesn't get you off the hook for mental application.
And again, it doesn't need Petrarca in the last quarter telling them what to do. The message isn't getting through. I think one of the major factors that everyone's overlooked is the loss of Uze. The coach on the bench isn't about tactical moves on the day.
Of course he's not.
He's there to pat the guys on the back, encourage them, make all sorts of positive gestures to them.
And communicate with the box.
Yeah, it's the guys upstairs who are doing the tactical stuff. There was no tactical change in this game. It was only a couple of magnet changes, put Fritsch down, move T-Mac up the other end of the ground, those sort of things. That was just, window dressing at the end of the day, trying to get something out of it. But there was no tactical change. So my question is the disconnect with the coaching or the disconnect with the training regime. Either way, it doesn't look good. So let's wait and see what the responses are over certainly this week. They're going to have to come out with something because that, like I said, that was the worst performance I've seen since the Mark Neal days.
Yeah, and the thing about why the Mark Neal days are relevant is because the effort wasn't there. Like the application, as much as I'm furious about that performance, and Andy, how many days is it that we've been outside we've been in the 8?
1,169 days we were inside the 8 from the beginning of 2021.
3 years.
In all seriousness, I've followed Melbourne for 45 years, and I have seen whole seasons where we've won one game, whole seasons where I've gone and not seen us win a game. Right, so they've got a lot of credit in my particular bank, right? So that was an appalling performance, totally unacceptable, but they've earned I just, it infuriates me to see people on Demonland strip through the club that you either support and love the club or you don't. Right. So that it drives me. I get it. People want to vent. People they've held up their anger or whatever, their frustration. But I went through years and years and years of going to the footy by myself. And I'd see a win every 6, 7, 8 weeks at best. And I'd see this sort of performance was more common than anything else. This is the first time this has happened under Goody.
Yeah.
When did he start coaching? 2017. This is what he's sixth season of being our coach. This is the first time I've seen us throw in the towel 20 minutes into the game and not give a yelp after half time. So this current group of players and the coaching staff have nothing but my admiration and a lot of credit in the bank. I mean, for God's sake, I gave bloody Barras 3 years of support, and we got flogged every week and had players turning up, not being, playing with the effort that you'd expect at this level. So, I think people need to, pay the club a bit of respect and get behind them. Now, that's when fans get behind your club when they're struggling after a thing like this, not to do the old Richmond, let's go drop manure off at Punt Road or microwave our memberships.
Wasn't it P Hearts or something?
Let's be better.
Chicken Hearts. All right. Well, let's get into your stats files and we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks because hopefully this is an aberration, but we'll see.
We'll see. And I think George sort of touched on it is next week suddenly becomes just such an important game, doesn't it? Because, as much as what I just said is that they've got credit in the bank of 2 weeks in a row, well, that'll erode a lot of that credit in my in that bank, that's for sure. So, look, I just don't think there's much value, like I said before, even sort of drilling down on any of the numbers. So I'm just going to speak to the two ones that are the DNA for the footy club under Goodwin, which is defence and contest. On defence, 141, that's enough said. Well, it's only the fourth time, I think, since the beginning of 2020 that teams put 100 points past us. We were defensively woeful right from the get-go, but the attitude seemed off as well. I think that even just to slightly contradict myself, no knock on, I don't want to be a Tomo basher, but we saw a little bit why he's going to not be the replacement for Lever because he's a one-on-one player. He's not a zone. We looked toothless once we took that zoning out of our football, out of our play. May had an absolute shocker and looks like back to where he can't bend down to get those ground balls. There was one that was embarrassing and it almost felt like we were going to give up a goal. We just had no defensive shape. But what the defenders would say is that everyone's supposed to bring defence to the table. There's not just the back seven. So our all-team defence was completely and utterly woeful. It was just woeful from the get-go. 141.
Big man, can I just interject? Because I know you're a Nibbler fan, and Nibbler has played, and just because you're talking about defence and all-team defence, we've had to play Nibbler in the middle, whether it's because of Brayshaw or not being there. Do you think that high half forward role, we're not doing that? That's been taken out of our game.
Well, definitely, that's had an impact.
And that's had an impact, that whole team defence thing?
Not this sort of impact. Like, no matter where we land on that, that's what I mean. There's almost no value in trying to find answers to what happened in this game because it's like, any elite level sport, if you approach the sporting event with this level of it was hopeless, really, of effort. You're not going to beat anyone. Doesn't matter. You're going to, the number one tennis player in the world, if they rock up and they're not switched on, will get beaten by the 200th player in the world. In any team sport, it's a bit harder to work out where you point the fingers. But yes, I think that's an issue. And then you've got the other compounding thing of having Hunter on the wing, who gave us not a huge amount, I didn't think, but then starting Langers forward. So he's our other gut runner. So he still would play that role a little bit. In fact, it's sort of probably, waxing a bit with a higher forward with Nibbler. But yes, definitely that would have had a factor. But again, nothing would explain yesterday. But our defence had a bad day. They would argue that, well, how could they not have a bad day? There was no pressure on the ball being kicked inside 50. There was no pressure on their ability to switch. We weren't covering. We were allowing them to kick it around the arc and just finding their way, stretching the defence. I thought coaching-wise, Freo did really well in terms of exploiting that. You could tell straight away that the way that they were looking to exploit us with run and width, and we weren't covering them. We weren't defensive. So our all-team defence was completely off. I'll give the details on this, but our pressure from our defenders was just terrible. McVee, May, Salem, Rivers, it was just terrible. And then for me, it was summed up, again, I don't want to bash Tomo, but that sort of effort not to touch that ball, I couldn't believe it. It was like the day writ large, wasn't it, when he couldn't get a fingertip on that ball. And the other thing is I didn't like to see there's a lot of, really poor body language across the board, I thought. And then the other one was contest. So, I don't care what game plan you've got. When you lose contested possessions, 96 to 138, minus 42 for contested possessions, I don't know. Would that be the most ever under Goody? The biggest differential under Goody, you reckon? Have to be up there.
You'd think so with the mids that we normally have in there. But
yeah, and I mean, I don't, you just don't, it doesn't matter. Everything else is off the table. If you are going to be down 42 contested possessions, I mean, I could go through all the other numbers. Our clearance, we just completely, got smashed in clearances. Our points from turnover, we actually did all right ourselves. We above our season average in scoring from turnover, but we gave up 92 points. All of that comes back to this number is uncontested possessions down 42. The other one is pressure points. Pressure, I should say. So a reminder, pressure points are the weighed sum of the pressure acts. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75 points, and that's physical pressure act is when you touch an opponent. So any tackle is a physical pressure act, a shove, a push. Anytime they physically touch the opponent, that's worth 3.7 points, 3.75. Closing acts are worth 2.25. Chasing acts are 1.5, and corralling are 1.2. The pressure index was brought in, as I've said a number of times, by the clubs. The clubs wanted it. They asked Champion Data for this, and they have this in front of the players in the when they're sitting on the bench. They are looking at these numbers. That's how important they are to the clubs. That's because it's the best indicator of collective effort. There is, the pressure numbers do go down with a more open flowing style, but nonetheless, they're a very good measure of effort. In our first quarter, it was reasonable, 179 to 172, so that was our best quarter, but I reckon a big chunk of that, I remember they showed it on the telecast, we were 185, 190 or something for the first 10 minutes to then 140. And that's the point in the game where it completely flipped. Then they had a block of time they put up on Fox where they were 220 or 218 for a 10-minute period, and we were 160 or something in that period. They completely smashed us in that 10 minutes of footy near the end of the first quarter, and that was it. The game was dead, and it was like we turned up our toes. Second quarter was 167 to 187. So minus 20 in the second quarter. That's just unforgivable. 198, we came out after half time, and that's good, that's better. But they were 205. It just showed how much sort of how much more pressure they were applying. 198 seems a bit so it didn't feel like 198 watching the last quarter, though. This is horrible. 154 in our last quarter. They're only 160, but it was a low pressure. It was like watching a game from that Neiled era when the opposition really are just trying to avoid getting injured. It was appalling. So it was 175, 180 for the match. But I wanted to highlight these numbers. So top 5 pressure players on a day that was woeful. Again, there's questioning about a midfield, but it's not the midfield who, is the issue. It's the forward line, which is why we went out in the mid-season draft and got a key forward, why we didn't get a mid. And there's been, I think justified criticism of Clary, but around his fitness. I don't think you could question his effort. So our top 5 pressure players who all deserve credit for turning up were Clary. He's 69 pressure points. He averages 47.2, so well over his season average. So he can be proud of that effort. People can knock him for all they want, but that's, the whole game is built on pressure. Modern footy is all about pressure. And so I wanted to highlight these players. Jack Viney also gets a bit of stick of late. His season average is 62.7, bang on 62 points worth of pressure in this game. Nibbler, his season average is 54.4, one of our best and most consistent pressure players. He's 61 pressure points, 25 individual acts. Clayton had 28 individual pressure acts, 61 pressure points for Nibbler. Cozzy, right up with his season average, 43 is his season average, 41 pressure points. And Track, as George mentioned before, he tried right from the bell to the end of the game. He only averages 34.9 pressure points per game. He applied 41. He had 41 pressure points in this game. So all 5 of those players deserve credit for the effort. And I think it's important to note that 4 of them are, if you include Nibbler as a midfielder, are midfielders. So, let's go down the other end. I mentioned how poor our defensive players were. Our bottom 6 pressure players were Trent Rivers, Tom McDonald, Christian Salem, who averages 26 pressure points a game this season, could only manage 12 in this game. Judd McVie, 12 pressure points. Stephen May, 12 pressure points. And Lockie Hunter, 7 pressure points. So of our bottom 6 pressure players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them were defenders. 5 of our bottom 6 who applied the least pressure on the day were defenders. Now, they probably would argue, come on, big man, we've been carrying this side all season and, it's okay and fair enough too, perhaps. But, that goes to 141 points. So they would also rightfully say that there wasn't the sort of support they were getting, all team defensive support they need to get to be able to defend properly. There was no pressure on that last kick inside 50. Some of the kicks that they were able to do look like, literally, they said it in the call 3 or 4 times, a training run, and it was a training run, really. That's it for, I don't think there's much value in looking at anything else. The fitness, we'll talk a bit later. There's a question from Lazy about that question, and I've got some thoughts about that, but I don't think you need to go any further than the defence and contest numbers.
Bin Man, do you think with the pressure there, the thing that struck me was in this game in particular, we don't have our best mids in there enough. We're supplementing them with secondary players who, by moving Petrarca up to the forward line, takes one of the best pressure players out of the forward line. His numbers have dropped off, I suspect, because he's not playing in the midfield. We need Viney, we need Oliver, we need Petrarca, we need Max in the middle.
But they're doing that to.
Sorry,
they're doing that to keep them fresh.
There's a major issue with the midfield numbers. They said before the coverage is we're number 1 in the AFL for protecting scores from clearances. That's because we don't.
I'm not arguing with that. I'm arguing that we're not using them enough as a team, because the opposition are certainly using their best mids in, particularly at the start of quarters, and we're not.
No,
are they doing that to correct the what they've think of mistakes of the past few years, that we've used them too much during the year, and then come finals they're cactus. But if we don't use them, we might not be in the finals to be cactus. And
as I said before, things have changed, and people may need to change the way that they're adopting the training and conditioning of players during the season.
I actually think Andy's point about if you're bringing Nibbler in, for instance, what do you lose of having him playing at high half forward and the other role that he plays where I noticed how Freo was setting up with a player who's basically inboard, who's not really a midfielder, but he's just sitting off the contest, the clearance contest. I think that's a big part of it. But I do think part of it, Andy's right, is wanting to not get them bashed up week in, week out. And I mean, really, the other issue too is, I think Clary has performed well, but he's still miles off his best, isn't he? Yeah. So, people talk about the midfield, but I mean, unless you're going to get rid of Clary and replace him with someone better than Clary, I mean, it's not.
We haven't got any, I can assure you.
We don't even have anyone here, but even if you went to the trade table, you're not going to get a better player than Clary who is affordable and available at the same time. So we've got who we've got, but Clary's not fit, is he? That's the problem. So he can't cover you've noted that point, George, a few times, is one of our struggles is we don't have enough quick players, and our midfielders are all bulls, and so they're not their strength. Not like a Chad Warner can roll through the middle for Sydney. He's quick, so our mids aren't particularly quick, and Heaney's relatively quick. For instance, Track isn't particularly quick. Viney isn't. He's relatively okay, but Clary's slower than he was. I mean, possibly.
We've got some questions about the midfield coming up, so let's get on to our listener questions. The first one's about the red and blue print. So Garbo says, I don't think even B-Man can manage to find a positive. As for the question for the pod, is the red and blue print 2024 a failure? And do we need to go back to the D's plan of 2021 to 2023? Or do we need to persist and see this through? Radish D says the red and blue print simply isn't working. When we turn the ball over in the back half, our disposal is not good enough to successfully move the ball to the forward line. We actually ended up with one more turnover than the Dockers today, but got significantly outscored on turnover. I'm sure Big Man has the stats. Yes, Fremantle's pressure was good, but not enough to show that kind of difference that leads to a 92-point loss. I think we simply don't have the personnel to make the game plan work. We're not skillful enough to move the ball fast without turning it back over, and we're not good enough in the air to take the contested marks necessary. We have to fix at least one of those. Should we persist with the game plan? For the record, I think Goody will persist because that's his nature. What changes can we make to turn the game plan around? Is it as simple as JVR coming in, or are there other structural changes we need? Travi14 says, almost 100-point loss to one of the worst defensive sides in the comp statistically. That is a very, very bad loss. Do we need to throw this new game plan out the window, as I don't think we have the cattle for it, which would mean reverting back to our old long-to-the-pocket game plan, which I never had an issue with. Lazy says, was this always going to be a step backwards to go forward year? I can't say for sure whether the old game style or the new game style is the way to go, but are the holes in our list and an ageing cattle alone enough to say that this was always going to be a pivot season? A year getting the red and blue print down and a few new acquisitions who can complement this could see us with a better shot at it in 2025. Is this too optimistic? What are your thoughts? And we've also got a question came in very, very late from Eva D, who says, hello, D. Melanders, love your work. I listen every week, however, never generally post. However, this week I feel the need to, after reading many of my fellow Demonlanders on this forum and social media. I also do have some questions on the way forward for the Ds. Firstly, I want to show my support to Goodwin, and the question why the view across many of our supporters is that our current issues are due to Goodwin not changing our game plan. This is exactly the opposite of what's happening. Clearly, we've changed the way we play to put more speed on the ball, attack through the middle, and handball our way out of congestion. Clearly, at this stage of the season, it isn't working, without being a complete failure. My view is that the issue is we don't have the type of players that can execute this, hence the breaking down and against any sort of pressure. So my question for the podcast is, do we persist or revert back to our contest best? I feel like Goody built a game plan that suited our players and at the end of the day delivered us a flag after 57 years and made us one of the toughest teams in the comp to play against. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. To me, this may be a transition year, like it may be for the Pies and Lions. However, with some smart recruiting and decent pre-season, we can still compete for the ultimate glory for a few more years yet. Let's not panic, and the last thing we want to be doing is sacking our most successful coach since Norm Smith. Cheers, Everdees. So we've also got a voicemail from Adam. I'll play that now.
Hey, Andy, George and Bin Man. It's Adam calling in from North Brisbane. Fortunately, I was at work yesterday afternoon, so I missed seeing what was a pretty wretched performance by all reports. Afterwards, on my lunch break, I went on the Demonland forums to see how the fans were reacting, and amongst the recriminations there, I saw one pretty insightful post that no team has given up a 90-point loss in a home and away season and gone on to win a flag. So there might be a bit of history against us there, but the question I wanted to ask, with the change to our game plan this year, are these results that we should be expecting? Because I've noticed that right throughout the year, the press conference will be sort of emphasising the amount of time it's going to take to develop this change in the game plan, and how long they're going to need to do that. So, I sort of want to ask, should we be viewing this as a 2 or 3 season project, and along the way are we going to expect results like this? Anyway, thanks very much for the work you do on the show. We enjoy listening every week, and thanks for taking my question.
So, big man, the red and blue print, is it a bust? Do we just go back to the tried and true, predictable down the line method? Your thoughts?
Well, as I said at the beginning of the season, my theory is that they're implementing it in order to reduce the physical impact of the model that we were playing with come finals. In 2022, we entered the finals completely and utterly banged up because we'd played this brutal forward half game of football. Similarly, in 23, we lost Petty to injury with, contact injury when he rolled his ankle against the Roos. We lost Melksham with his knee. We had T-Mac coming back from an injury.
Fritsch was out.
Sorry?
Fritsch was out.
Fritsch was out. That's right. Never came good. We had Salem was injured. The people say learn from the lessons of the past. Let's not reinvent history here, because on Demonland, people were screaming out for us to change our game plan because it was too physically taxing for the reason that we ended up doing it. So my theory, and I've no reason to change my mind on it, is that the part of the logic of our method was to get us through, and that all teams will revert to the forward half model. That basically, of course, territory inside 50s, that's been our DNA. And that's what we will start playing again come finals. But there's no point. We won't win that if we've got all of our all of our players are so banged up and they can't do it. So that's been my theory. Also, we're not, one of the things that Goody he hasn't given up on being a defense first coach. So bad week he did this week, 141 points. But so he's trying to find a hybrid model. So it's not the pure Collingwood model that is really, which is rolling the dice off the halfback flank and being confident enough in your fitness to be able to, if the ball's turned over, to get back. Because think about when Collingwood get opened up. They get opened up when they get the goals out of the back. It's exactly the same way as Port. Port play this high transition game as well. You get through their last line and you score out the back just like Carlton did to them. They just defensively push up so high and don't have that keeper. In this game, it was the first time in a long time we had 3 goals out the back where there was no one out the back. There was a lack of discipline where there was no one back in that sort of point of the triangle. So Goody's been trying to, I think, do a hybrid where we're still defensively strong behind the ball, where we still try to put the slows on them and if we can, and get our defensive zone shape behind the ball set up while still going fast off the halfback flank. And as I said at the beginning of the season, and as I still believe, I think the goal is to use that model and then come finals, revert to something that looks like our 21, 22, 23 game plan, maybe with a little bit still better transition off the halfback flank. Scores from turnover are still going to be big. No matter what model, you still need to turn it over. I think that we do lack the skill. I've been talking about this for years now on the podcast, is that our biggest weakness, in my view, and has been for 20 years, is how many poor kicks we've got in the side. The pure model that the Pies were playing in the first half of the year, the high turnover, high transition, the ones that the Swans, watch the Swans play. They've got Goulden, they've got they've got Warner, they've got Heaney,
Blakey.
They've got excellent. They've got not not excellent. They've got elite level kicks on every line who are, their game plan is built around that transition, but it's also their weakness because come finals, let's see how they go when it becomes a brutal rugby game, which every finals does. I went through the numbers for the finals last year, there was only 3 games or 3 scores over 100. The rest devolve into a brutal forward half game, and so I have no doubt that we'll revert to it. I hope that Goody doesn't feel the pressure and revert to it next week on the back of this loss, because if the plan was to do something different, it's stupid to, on the back of one terrible result, to throw that plan out. Though I suspect, contradict myself again, is I suspect next week we will. Next week is such a critical game, and it will be a finals-like game because it's the big crowd, it's the big freeze, it's Collingwood, it's the replay of that final. I suspect it'll be played very much like a final, and so I think we'll see a reversion next week to forward half, inside 50, win territory, win the contest, less transition footy. But I hope that we don't completely revert to that, because otherwise we'll risk coming to finals all banged up again. And I'm fully confident we'll make finals despite that result.
Bates Mate says our midfield, once the best in the league, is now average. Who else should we try through there? D Positive says Track and Max hold up. Even Clary, while not dominating, is still contributing. The roles of our all midfielders rely on each component playing their part, and that seems to be failing due to the arrogance and no protection from umpires. Delirium asks, what has happened to our hunger and never say die attitude, the mids? For the last few weeks, they've been second to the ball, and if they keep playing the way that they are, at least we won't have to worry about going out in straight sets, because if nothing changes now, we won't be playing finals. Today's performance was an absolute disgrace. And we also got something in late from Swooper Northey, who said, hi guys, thanks for conducting this much needed group therapy session. I appreciate that we're struggling to come to grips with an evolving game plan, which was exposed for all to see in the Alice, but I've been worried about our midfield for a while. Yes, we've tried running Pickett and Neil Bullen through the middle with some success, but it also robs us of their important roles as forwards. I feel that we place too great a reliance on Petrarca, Oliver and Viney as genuine mids, which is starting to show, particularly given Clary's limited pre-season. With the loss of Gus, we have one less midfielder in our ranks to add to those rotations. It takes me back to the debate George and Big Man were having in the pre-season about midfield depth and just how deep our stocks run compared to other contenders. I feel that we're vulnerable. So, George, what's happened to our midfield?
There's a few things I think going on, and I think we'll start with the ruck for a start. I don't think Max is being managed correctly. In this game in particular, it was in the third quarter. Yeah, third quarter. Came out at half-time, so he's had 20 minutes off the ground. Comes into the ruck. 2.5 minutes later, he's taken off the ground for a rest. Why does he need to be taken off after 2.5 minutes? I think it's just simply mismanagement. Then we put Petty into the ruck. Max doesn't get back on the ground for another 5 minutes. There's something seriously going wrong with the rotations and the way people are being used. I don't like having Petrarca sitting in the forward line as he did for almost the last quarter in this game. We needed him in the middle. The game was good and over, but the times that people are playing in their particular roles, if you include the wingers in it, Langdon's playing half forward. We'd lose that speed, we'd lose that connection when you're taking those sort of players away. We need a Langdon to be able to get the ball out to be able to deliver it. So I think there's a bit of mismanagement going on. I spoke about before the number of times we've got Cozzy going in there, and he's spending an awful lot of time in there compared to what would, I think, be the preferable option, which is the shock treatment. Put him in there for 1-2 goes and then move him out. But we seem to be reverting to lesser players in their roles, and this is throughout the whole field. With missing Neil.
Sorry, because he had 17 centre bounces this week after 20 last week. It's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot. And we're missing him in the forward line. As a result, when the ball goes up there, people are wondering why we're not kicking goals, because he's been spending his time in the middle. So I think there's a bit of mismanagement going on. let's wait and see whether any changes. But the Max one really confounded me totally, especially when he played the whole of the last quarter without a break. Why would you give him a break 2.5 minutes after a 20-minute break, and then bring him on and then play him for the whole last quarter? It's not being managed properly at the moment.
Let's get into the loading question, B-Man. So Lazy asks, can we use loading as an excuse for a 90-plus point loss? Genuine question, because I'm going to find it hard to listen if that's the narrative and that we'll be running on the top of the ground in a few months. So B-Man, I know that Lazy isn't the only person that's sick and tired of loading being an excuse for poor performance. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, look, my thoughts are, for the millionth time, of loading and load management and the way they train is, and I've never used it as an excuse. I sound frustrated because I am. It really gives me the shits, to be honest. As I've said literally hundreds of times, it's a factor. If you ignore it as a factor, then you are stuck with what? They're mentally not turning up. What's going on. It's like I said last week. If you accept. No one argues when I say that we're a terrible kicking side. Not a single person has ever said to me, Bin Man, no, well, why do you keep talking about how poor we are as a kicking side? And when I do say that it's a big factor in the way we lose games and have done consistently ever since I've been on Demonland, for instance, no one says, oh, you're making an excuse for by pointing out their kicking. I mean, it's the same thing. It is the high performance program of footy clubs, as I've been talking about last year, the year before, and a number of times this year, is, I think, probably equally important to the outcome of the season as the coach, arguably even more, but we don't ever talk about it. But that's changing a little bit. So there was that article that George noted in The Age with Libby Birch, who's been around high-performing and elite at the Melbourne, of course, and elite training systems herself, talked about the way that they're training in blocks. I heard Daniel Hoyne talk about the bringing up the quotes from Scott 2 years ago, who said that we will risk missing the finals by the way we're choosing to manage our players. I was going to get you to clip that up this week, Andy. He literally said that. We are prepared to risk missing the finals if it gives us the best chance of winning a flag. Right, that's what he said. There's no sort of two ways about that. And then there was a discussion. Hoyne went on to talk about their strategy of managing of their players, like their older players. He also talked in the same context about Goody's comments about managing Max at the end of the season, something that he's not done. So as for the question about loading in this match, I don't think loading was a particular factor in this match. It may have been. Every year, I mean, come on, let's look at what happens every year around our bye. When do we have our worst under Goodwin? When has our worst performances been? Consistently now, this is the fourth year it's happened around the bye period. So is that a coincidence? I mean, of course it's not a coincidence unless you want to ignore the facts in front of you. So I was really interested to hear these comments from, if you could play this clip. This is Buckley on SEN. You put this up on Demonland. I think it's really, it's good context for this is he's the most recently retired AFL coach in the media at the moment. He knows what he's talking about with fitness. This dude is, he was a, famously super fit, years ahead of the curve in terms of his preparation, and he was super focused on it as a coach at Collingwood.
There was vision after the game, and body shapes and weights haven't been thrown up. But all I'll say is, looking at the Melbourne rooms after the game, they don't look as hard and fit as I would expect a top 4 AFL team to look. And they don't have a lot of injuries. Lever and Melksham potentially, but from what I saw, the vision that I saw, they're warm down, and I know. Look, in the end, You've got to call as you see it. There was some players there that I thought didn't look in the condition that you would expect them to be at. If you're going to be coming up against the AFL's best teams and expecting to win it, the performance was terrible, and they just don't look hard and fit.
And thank God, finally, someone in the media is saying it. Right, I'm not talking about specifically about Melbourne. It is such a critical factor in football. I'm amazed more people don't. I mean, it's so obvious. You could see it yesterday. So, of course, it's not an excuse. There's a mental aspect to it. Collingwood, for instance, you can only but be impressed by, their ability to keep performing at the level they've been performing in the last 4 weeks with the injuries they've got. I agree 100% with what Buckley just said. There's a couple of comments in the chat room about we're not, that wasn't our only bad match for the year, that we were average since losing to Brisbane. I agree. What I meant before is that this match that we just suffered through was next level bad. Brisbane was bad. Even worse was West Coast, but they were in the realm of just bad football games. This was well outside the realm of bad footy games. And in some of the comments from the callers that you played, Andy, we've got the chasm between good and bad, the gap between our best and worst. We haven't had a 4-quarter effort all season. They're right. Those comments are right. And as I said, I've followed footy for a long time, and you can one of the drivers of inconsistent performance, particularly in the modern era in the last few years, is fitness. And so you remember after the Eagles game, I predicted that you watch next week, they will be flat as attack against the Crows, flat as attack. They got flogged by 90 points. That's because they're not fit either. Right, they're not yet AFL top 4 level fit, the Eagles, and so you can't back it up. The really fit teams can back it up week after week, mentally and physically. And they got flogged by nearly 100 points by the Crows in the following game, and when you're not fit across the board, that's when you get inconsistent performances both within a match. So that notion of us not playing 4 quarters, probably the Saints game was the only time we applied sort of consistent level effort right for 4 quarters. We've hardly done that all season. I reckon the Saints game is the only time. And then week to week performance. Now, I've been pondering it, trying to think through what's behind that. So, I 100% agree with what Buckley just said. And did you see the way he's dancing around it? Because it's totally taboo to say that, is that they're not fit, because the Channel 7, Fox don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear it, but it's spot on. It's true. And I think it's absolutely a case. Now, it would, as I said, it would explain the inconsistency that Goody also noted the inconsistency. And if you listen to that presser, he says some interesting sort of code words around that. I think that the glass half full way of looking at it, so people can choose their own adventure. I wonder whether that's partly by design, is to plan their fitness as the season goes on with the goal of minimising the impact of training so hard as they did. I've heard players say that we train harder than any other AFL club, and that our training sessions under Burgess and then in the last couple of years under Selwyn they're harder often than the game itself. I've heard multiple players say that. So maybe they've dialed that down a little bit with the goal of minimising the impact. So it's not such hardcore training for 6 months. So to maximise the likelihood we're in peak shape in September. It's a really challenging season, 24 weeks of it. There's no doubt the impact of having multiple players in the team off interrupted pre-seasons who are still clear, who are clearly not fully fit yet. Like Paddy still doesn't look fully fit, does he? Is having an impact. There's no doubt about that, but we're choosing to play them anyway. Now, I wonder whether that sort of touches on that philosophy that I was just saying, is that part of building towards the end of the season. The other relevant factor is the change method. So we're playing a method that is less physically taxing. So it's because there's much less contest and much less stoppages, much more free flowing, but it's much more taxing aerobically. We're doing running. Remember after the Richmond game, May was interviewed and talked about how taxing it is for defenders to get caught in a turnover game that goes back and forward between the arcs. And finally, it's important to note that we've got we've got 9 to 13 players, 24 and under every single week that are playing in our team. So we can expect some level and challenge in regard to their ability to be top 4 level fitness in terms of psychology. The less half glass full is because the other possibility, of course, is that they've got the program completely wrong, which is what George has noted just at the top before. They've got it completely wrong, or the players haven't done the work that they've needed to do. If the latter is the case, so if that's the case, that we've got the program wrong and the players haven't done the work, then we're toast. Right, so I'm very much hoping it's the first one. If it's the latter, then we are in big trouble. We're not going to make up that ground if it's not been planned for. But to go back to the question that Lazy said, there's no way fitness explains that performance. Like it was a mental thing. Like we didn't come to play. It wasn't even in the park of coming to play. So then what else was at play, All was rosy after we beat the Cats. Clary was interviewed in the rooms afterwards. He was up and about. I forget the game. Which game was it where everyone was applauding Track for, sprinting and spoiling that ball through defensively?
Maybe the Richmond game or the Hawthorn game.
Right. So, yeah, Hawthorn game. So everyone was up and about. Everyone was talking about we were talking about how positive the culture was and how connected the play. This is only 3 weeks ago we beat the Cats and everyone was up and about, or 4 weeks ago. Has something happened since then? Some of the things that have come to my mind are selection integrity. Are players like Wowie and Laurie, are they looking at a player like Hunter who, I know he got injured in this match, but he'd done nothing before it and had, as George noted, had done nothing at Casey really seemingly to deserve a call-up. Are players like Wowie and Laurie getting their nose out of joint? Is there something else going on? Were the players, upset or pissed off that Langdon was allowed to go to London for his sister's wedding? Is there something else going on that, we don't know about? Is there some sort of conflict between the players? Who knows? But that's what it felt like. So to answer Lazy's question, it might be a factor in a loss, our fitness. There's no question. We're not running on top of the ground. That does not explain mental, application and effort and the body language, and that there's no excuses for that. There's zero excuses for that sort of performance.
Couple things from the chat room, sir. Why you little says there's no point saving the team for September if you don't make September. And then,
well, I just go back to what I said about Scott. Scott's an AFL coach who said, literally, we can bring up the clip next week, is that we are prepared to risk missing the 8 if it means we've got a greater chance of winning the flag. And that's where Goody's at too. He's about winning flags, not making the 8.
Johnny Karate in the chat room has some interesting stats. So since round 10, 2022, that was after we won the first 10 games of after our premiership year. Our win-loss record since then has been 29 wins, 22 losses. So that's not great. And from that, 11 we've won 11, lost 17 against top 8 sides. And we've won 18 and lost 5 against bottom 10. The question is, are we down?
It's only helpful if we can see all of the other contenders' numbers, though. Right. So was it 11 and 17 from top 8? That's not so bad. Yeah. Or let's have it bring up Collingwood in the same time.
I prefer to be 17-11.
Yeah, we'll bring up Collingwood since that same date.
I don't have that.
Yeah, exactly. So
Johnny Karate, get to work and and let us know before the end of the program, because I'll forget by next week. All right, let's move on. Harrison Petty. So Bigfoot says, surely the Petty up forward experiment is over. Swap him with T-Mac, leave T-Mac forward and either send Petty down back or send him to Casey to work on his forward craft. Picket Fence replies, just ring Adelaide and see what they are prepared to offer us for next year. Delirium says, Turner and Petty need to go out of the team. Petty is next to useless. McDonald needs to go forward. Track Forever says, hi guys, thanks again for always turning up even after these tough losses. Petty and Disco don't really offer anything, so do you think it's time to bite the bullet and play Jefferson and Fullerton and see if they offer anything different? Not sure what we have to lose trying something different. Interested in your thoughts. D Positive says, Petty's most is the most interesting dilemma. Since rumours of the Adelaide Millions, he has not been the same. Perhaps he's trying to protect his only asset, his body, and not playing fearlessly. I did suggest that he should have been told when not traded that he would be released this year only after he'd contributed to winning another flag, when his value would be increased. No flag, he would be given away for a lot less, but maybe he was offered an even better deal from Adelaide, playing poorly, bringing down the Ds, and we will pay you even more. Drop him until he can contribute strongly. I don't think that's the case. Pipe Fitter says, the Petty experiment up forward has to end. What can getting 2 touches a game be doing for his confidence? Getting back in defence so he can touch the leather again. So, George, is the Petty up forward experiment over? We saw Disco Turner move to defence, T-Mac move forward, and he comes and kicks 2 goals. What's the answer to our forward line woes?
There is no answer to our forward line, Rose.
You've got to get it into the forward line.
It's like some sort of ancient philosophical question, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, there is no doubt that Petty had an awful game in this. Guess what? There are about 14 or 15 other players who had even more perhaps awful games. Game in Alice Springs. Petty's up forward because JVR was unavailable this week, so we had to put him in. We didn't put Ben Brown in, who if you'd watched Casey in the last couple of weeks, simply cannot move. So Petty's providing more options to us than what our next option is. So don't be too hard on Petty. Yes, we moved T-Mac up the forward line because Petty also had to do the rucking during the game. It's not surprising the guy was completely shattered. I suspect. He came off a interrupted preseason and only got onto the ground at the last minute, quite literally. If you go back to March, he was injured, and then he's put into the side because we had no other options. That hasn't changed. I'm afraid if people need to see Casey to see how far away, people keep talking about Fullerton. Fullerton will not be playing under any circumstances as a ruck, and maybe even as a forward. Jefferson, you don't want to burn him. He's starting to show what a forward needs to show down at Casey, but you put him up to AFL level and he'll do no different from what Petty's doing at the moment. So our resources up forward are pretty limited. It's what we've got. We have to deal with what we've got the best way we can. Putting T-Mac up forward was great. All right, that means we've got to move someone down the back line. Who do you move down the back line? Petty or Turner? Oh, they were the same guys who were non-performing on some people's assessment up forward line. We just haven't got the players available. It's just sad fact of life.
Just that reminded me, George, is the other thing I meant to point out about the fitness is that in our 23, our regular 22, so in addition to, in addition to where we're at with the program itself, it's one of the absolute truisms of footy is that interrupted pre-seasons, you never really catch up. And how many, McAdam, even T-Mac had interrupted pre-season. He seems to have overcome it, but he's been a bit flatter the last couple of weeks. Clary, obviously. Salem. And Hunter, he's in now, who were all in the game on the weekend, and I'm missing someone or Benny Brown, when he was in, he came in off our interrupted preseason, but just in the weekend side, that's 4, Petty, of course, so that's 5 players in that side out of 23. So a quarter of the players who played on the weekend interrupted pre-season. That's no wonder, that just further exacerbates the fitness issue. And Murdoch asked a question in the chat room. I agree with your point about fitness, Bin Man, but surely there has to be blame pointed at the fitness department for not prepping the players properly. 100% agree. And that's what, if you don't identify that that's a potential cause, they get off scot-free. And then all of the blame gets put onto the players and the coach, who there's plenty of blame to share around after performance like that. But I absolutely agree with that comment. And of course, they need to be questioned. Their job is to have the players prepared for a game of footy, regardless of where they're at with their load management and their density of training, and and how they've planned out the program for the year. The expectation would be from Goody is that they're ready to play an AFL level, a game of footy, and they didn't look that way. Of course, partly that's mental, but they didn't look that way on the weekend. And again, I'll go back to Buckley's comments. He's spot on. Funnily enough, I saw just as they were coming into the room, Clary took his jumper off, and he might have been one of the players, for instance, Buckley might have been referencing, because he didn't look AFL level rig, or he looked not even a bin man level at my very best.
To be fair, Clary has never looked AFL level rig.
But particularly this year, he's looked a bit junky.
He was unbelievable. So that's of course they should be questioned. At the moment, no one is, so they're getting off scot-free.
I will guarantee you at the end of the season, Richmond are replacing their fitness and conditioning staff.
McAdam, Pingu says, Shane McAdam once again failed to make the distance with a 35-metre kick. Surely surely we can't continue to gift him games. Jane02 adds, I'm still not sure what McAdam brings to the table. Can't kick the distance and his body language is terrible. He lacks confidence, and I'm at a loss to understand the hype and why we recruited him. So, big man, do we have to persist with McAdam or does he need to find some form at Casey?
My head nearly exploded when he didn't make the distance with that kick. It was like it was at a point of the game where we were sort of not going well, obviously, but it's like, come on, we've got, can we turn this around? And it just sort of took any air out of my tyres when he missed it.
Can he not kick the distance, or did he stab at it? Because it looked like he stabbed at it.
Same result. He kicked it.
I know. So,
he kicked it to the Freo player on the line. So they marked it. So
sometimes players do that for the accuracy part, but if you're not going to make the distance, well,
the thing that he's not giving that, as I said a few weeks ago, feels a bit silly to say this, but I had in my mind that he was bigger than he was, and so I saw him in my mind's eye playing that Melksham role and being able to impact more contests where he just bring the ball to ground, even if he wasn't marking it. But he's not really doing that, and he's not really clunking his marks. It's almost as if they're trying to play him into – it's a bit like I was saying, they're playing him. He still doesn't look fit enough. He doesn't look big across the shoulders and the arms. I don't know whether – I'll be interested to hear. Did Colt play on the weekend, George?
Yes, he did, yeah.
I mean, I personally – I would rather him in the side. McAdam has not done, enough for me to go, well, he's got no credit in the bank either. Speaking of credit in the bank, I haven't seen him play, really any great footy. I don't recall much what he did at the Crows. He's got a pretty good, goal average in terms of average goals per game. It's 1.5 or something.
During the week, someone on Demonland noted that he was subbed out of the game 6 times last year at the Crow.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it's a bit hard to know. It sort of goes to the point about what you were saying, George, about, you're playing Cozzy more in the centre. Well, then you need a Cozzy-like player when he's not. Maybe that's part of why, that someone pointed that out last week or the week before, is that maybe he's in the side to balance up when Coz goes on the ball. But he just hasn't done enough, has he? And then when you think, well, then you look. You've got Petty. I mean, people talk about midfield. You've got Petty getting 2 kicks, and McAdam, I don't know how many kicks he got. It can't be much more than that, but can't make the distance from 35 metres. And Fritsch goes completely missing in this game, and I thought his body language was back to some of his worst body language. You got 3 of your 6 forwards are giving 0, nothing to the game. So.
We also only had 37 inside 50, so the ball really didn't get there.
That's true.
Royal Demon says, after that performance in the Eagles game a fortnight ago, I honestly can't see us playing finals this season, and our current position outside the 8 absolutely flatters us at the moment. Do the panel think the form can be turned around, or are we just not good enough? George, should we be booking holidays in September? And I'm asking that for my wife. Just wants to know.
For a very serious Melbourne supporter, there's no snow in September. Why would you be wanting to book holidays in September?
No, I'd like to go somewhere warm.
The global warming's hit these fans terribly, hasn't it? Like, at least in the southern hemisphere.
It's only halfway through the season, and while we're out of the 8 on percentage alone. That's not the end of the world, and I'm sure Binman would back us up on that. So, yeah, we're a long way to go yet, and we'll just have to wait and see.
And I predict there'll be. I said this 6 weeks ago that there will be a lot of wacky results this season, and there'll be a bunch more to come.
Well, let's get talking on this one, because maybe it's way too early for this. El Diablo asks, mini rebuild now, including an overhaul of the footy department and coaching staff. Time to do something before we find ourselves out in the wilderness for years to come. Buck Naked asks, WTF was that? Serious question. My next question is about depth and fringe players. We rely on too few to be superstars and drag the rest along. When Track and Max look good, so do others. The rest of the squad. Seriously, that fringe that we need these two to carry them each week. Harsh, I know, but that's where we're at. Who else can carry the team? If Oliver was rested and Viney was out injured, who would come in? Demon Jack says, thanks guys for fronting up to do the pod after an almost decade worst performance. I would like to get the panel's take on where they think our list is at and if a mini rebuild is necessary. I know Big Man says we have almost the best list in the competition, and 3 years ago I would agree with him. Like many others, I think our recruiting and list management decisions have been poor since our premiership win. I see holes everywhere in our list at the moment. Most concerning is no reliable key forwards apart from JVR, no adequate backup for Max. Our midfield is lacking speed, skill and depth. I think there are obvious issues with the game plan as well, but I am very concerned with our list going forward and feel we need to make some smart decisions for the future before Tassie come into the comp and get given a lot of first-round draft picks like Gold Coast and GWS. Demons 1 replies to Jack, we had a backup ruck for Max, but he's at the Swans. Won a flag with 2 rucks and seems as this strategy changed after the Grundy disaster and a backup ruck in Fullerton who can't get a game. Not sure what the strategy has been since 21, but our game plan, lack of key forwards won't see us winning any finals, and that's even if we make them. Billings, Hunt, McAdam, Shackey and are not winning big games. Windows shut, and glad we got to see one. B-Man, do we need a mini rebuild to replenish our depth?
Well, I'm not sure what people mean by a mini rebuild because...
Well, probably at the end of the year. I don't think
well, yeah, of course. But, well, what would that look like? I mean, it's an easy sort of term to throw around, but what would it look like? What are we talking about? Are we talking about... All right, so let's think it through. How would we do that? Well, you do that by going to the top of your draft period and getting at least 2 top 10 or 2 top 15 draft picks. How do you do that?
Got to try.
Well, you trade who?
Players.
Yeah, you've got to trade away
Draka or one of your A-graders. How else do you get a top 10 pick? And as I pointed out at the beginning of the season and just sort of referenced again then, we've got 9 players playing in our 23 under the age of 24. We've got... Cozzy, who's only 24. We've got JVR, who's 21. We've got McVee, who's 21. We've got Howes, who will probably come back in this week, who's 21. We've got Windsor, who we picked up at number 7 by getting – we've already done the mini rebuild. We got a pick 7 pick with Windsor, who's playing regular senior footy. Where was Tolstrup? Was he 13?
Yeah.
13. So,
yeah.
Like, we're hardly going to get a better go at the draft, even if we were to trade out. We've got no draft picks to speak of coming into this. So if people wanted to do a mini rebuild, well, what that means is maybe trading Max or maybe trading, like, honestly, how else are you going to get a top 10 pick? And you can't do a rebuild without a top 10 pick. And it drives me nuts every year in the mid-season draft. And then when we start talking trading is, we need to do something about our midfield. So we need to trade someone in. Who? A Brad Crouch or, who is going to – we need an A-grader. We don't need any more depth players. We've got enough depth players. We need A-grade talent to bring in. So, that the way to go a rebuild, a mini rebuild, is to go back down the bottom and stock up with your draft picks by going down the bottom. Do we want to do that again? Do these fans really want to go back down to being a cellar dweller? I mean, the sort of talk about, some of the talk on Demonland and in the questions tonight and the comments, I get it because we're all angry and it was frustrating, but I don't want to spend years at the bottom of the ladder in order to get a few top draft picks to go through another cycle. I'd much prefer the Geelong model, the Swans model of being competitive for 8, 9, 10 years, which is what Goody wants to do. And he's rebuilding right in front of our eyes, which is part of the factor. It's part of the reason why. So if you want to rebuild and bring kids in, well, what happens to North Melbourne when that happens? They get flogged every now and again because they're kids. We've got kids too, right? So, people should, like a mini rebuild to what end? So we've got enough young kids coming through. This notion about depth too, it just is way overplayed. Is every club relies on their top 4 or 5 players. It's just the nature of it. Like Sydney are doing great because they've had no injuries. You take out Blakey, Goulden and Heaney from that team and they're back with the pack. It's just how it is. There's depth issues at every single clubs, and now there's injury issues as well that compound those depth issues.
I find it just as equally annoying when people say, all we need's a full forward, all we need's a ruck, well, go out and see if you can find one.
Well, we tried with or a second ruck. So we go out and get Fullerton, and everyone's going, oh, no, he's terrible. Well, who else was about?
That's right, yeah.
Like, well, what about Lobb? So let's go get Lobb because he's on the market and he's a second. He's a decent second ruck and a decent forward. Suggest that, and people go, "Oh no, we can't get Lobb. We need an A grader."
Yeah, I would always remind people who was the last decent trade for a decent player, an A grade player that went through. And the last one I can remember is Lynch at Richmond, which got them another. That was fine.
Exactly.
But they had to give away, 3 or 4 players to be able to do that.
And now they're suffering for it.
And now they're suffering. Yeah. And the previous one before that, I can only remember Dangerfield.
Dangerfield. Yeah, exactly. Dangerfield.
But you're talking about 2 players in 10 years.
And Dangerfield, they took years before they got another top 10 pick, the Cats. It was only 2 years ago that when they got their picks from Kelly that they were able to stock up with top 10 picks.
Yep.
So you can't rebuild unless people, like if we were to rebuild, it would mean seriously getting rid of a Rivers, someone like a Bowie, maybe even a JVR. That's the way to get top 10 picks, but in the absence of that, we're not going to get Reid to the club but we're going to have to give up a lot to get them.
Let's go to the phone lines. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Who am I talking to?
G'day, Andy. Kieran from Canberra. How are you? Good, Kieran. How are you doing? Yeah, doing well. Look, amongst all the sadness, I thought I'd ring in and let you know that the mighty Gungahlin Jets under 8s and under 10s won, and just thought I'd bring a bit of happiness. Bring a bit of happiness to the podcast.
What was the temperature at
Gungahlin?
What was the temperature at Gungahlin when they were playing?
George, it was 9:15 in the morning, and it was 3 degrees.
Yep, lovely.
At least the Jets can play in adverse weather conditions.
And the umpire, who is the caller right now, paid some lovely holding the ball, so the AFL would have been pretty happy, I would have thought.
Were you red hot on them?
Well, mate, what I look for is incorrect disposal. I think that's one of the things that people are missing as umpires. I think incorrect disposal is what will fix the issues rather than too many more holding the balls. But, look, that's just this humble umpire's opinion. That's all. Thanks for the call.
Oh, that's it? Nothing else?
I thought I'd try and bring some joy to you guys to let you know there was a win from in amongst the Demon fraternity, guys.
All right, well, we appreciate that. Thank you very much, Kieran, and keep your head up.
Good on you, Kieran. If you can also find any guns in there for the rebuild, just point them towards Goody.
Yes, we'll do, Bin Man. We'll do. And good luck I'm sure you guys will be there on Monday, and good luck amongst the filth.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not our home game. Not looking forward to it. Thank you, Kieran. Much appreciated. That was Kieran from Canberra. Always a great call. Let's move on to our next one. Red Jacket says, not suggesting that the result would have been any different at the MCG given our recent record against the Dockers, but do you think that we should end our Northern Territory home game sell-off? We have a terrible record there, and after 12 games this season, supporters have only had 4 home games to attend at the G, and we will only play our 5th home game at the G in round 15. That's it. Round 15 is only our 5th home game at the MCG this season. So, George, should we be ditching our $500,000 payday to play in the NT and reclaim the extra home game at the G?
Firstly, I don't think that we can afford to, despite what some people might be presenting in terms of the financial statements. We can't afford to lose, and I think it's more than $500,000. I think it's about $750,000, if I remember. But it's we're not losing it, apart from the supporters who can't get to Alice Springs. We're not losing anything by these games. We were beaten by GWS last year in absolutely appalling conditions. We were beaten by Fremantle because we were appalling. The same results would have happened at the MCG, and the supporters who would have turned up would have been even more angry perhaps than what they were they at the game itself. So that's another matter. I think the AFL are very happy to have the games being played in Alice Springs for a start. I don't think it'll last forever, simply because the AFL, I think, are very keen about making the Suns more of the NT sort of side. I don't think there's any future in trying to get an AFL team in the Northern Territory. There just aren't enough people. We're going to struggle with enough for Tasmania, and that has to be subsidised to the hilt to make that work. So I think we'll be there for a little while, but watch out for the AFL moving the Suns into this game.
Round 15 is only our 5th. That's a 5th home game of the G. That's a pretty sobering number, isn't it?
But we've got a lot.
That's our 6th home game.
That's home games. So we've got games against Richmond and Hawthorn and Collingwood.
Yeah. But even just home games,
I'm talking about home games where we get to sit in our assigned seats or whatever. That's only our 5th.
Yeah.
And only our 6th home game all up, round 15 rounds in.
Right. Yeah. I'd be happy to give up this game. I mean, it's the ground. Well, obviously no excuse, but I couldn't believe it when they said in the pre-match coverage that the ground hadn't drained properly after the rain 2 days earlier. Now I know it rained heavily, like 20, 30 mils. That's a lot, but the MCG gets rid of that in 12 hours, doesn't it? But it's obviously, there's obviously 2 different standard grounds, but this is not the first time the AFL, they went out on the ground to check it for safety before. They had footage of Max sort of.
Well, what was the point of that? What were they going to do? Call the game off?
Well, yes, that was what that's what jockeys do. They go around and make a decision about whether it's safe to ride on, and that was what they were deciding. And thank God we didn't get a knee injury out of it.
Well, we haven't had the injury report just yet.
That's true.
I get too excited. Let's get on. Well, we should have kept Kieran on the line because we've got some positives here. Amanda Lorian says, the only positive I can take out of this debacle is that in round 13 of the year 2000, we lost to Carlton by 98 points and then went on to play in a grand final. That's all I've got. MPC says, the only thing that gives me the slightest bit of hope this season is that other teams have suffered disastrous losses during their premiership years and recovered, most recently Richmond in 2017. In Richmond's drought-breaking 2017 premiership year, it was stunned by St Kilda in a round 16 encounter at Marvel Stadium. The Tigers had a meagre goal on the board at halftime and trailed by a whopping 82 points. They ended up losing by 67 points. You can also look to last year. After 12 rounds, 2 preliminary finalist teams only had 4 wins and were 14th and 15th on the ladder. Unfortunately, I think we have bigger issues, but I still hold out hope we can somehow recover from this. After all, we are only 1 game outside the top 4 with 12 rounds to go. So I'm not going to ask Positive Binners whether he finds solace in those stats, because I'm sure he does, and I'll take this one. No, I do not find any comfort whatsoever from those statistics.
I've got some positives on the weekend, Andy. Positive from this show is that I won't need counselling now because I've found this very therapeutic, much more therapeutic than I thought I might. So, my angst is dissipating as the minutes go forward. So that's a positive. Another positive is that first time in ages had a bet on a D's game. I had a very, very good punting weekend on the footy. So that was a positive on the weekend. But had a bet in this game, over the total match points of, I thought it was a ridiculously low total match points, and punters, it was 153 the punters had their total match point on, because presumably the two, number one and number two defensive sides in the competition. So it was a fairly sort of, grim humour. I watched
Freo almost
made 153 by themselves. So at least when they were carving us up, halfway through the third quarter, I already had that bet won. So that was a positive.
I prefer the Gungahlin Jets.
Yeah, that was a positive as well.
All right, let's move on to Casey. The Casey Demons headed to Coburg to take on the Lions, who had only won one game this season, 0 games in 2023, 4 games in 2022, and 3 games in 2021. With 10 AFL-listed players to none, Casey were beaten all over the field and ultimately lost the game by 26 points and only had 2 wins and only have 2 wins to their name and sit 18th place on the ladder out of 21 teams. We had a caller leave a voice message with his thoughts on the game. Casey, so take it away, Demonologist.
Hi, Andy, George and Bin Man. This is Demonologist. Rather than talking about the Freo debacle, I wanted to report on the Casey match versus Coburg on Saturday. I went along to Piranha Park and settled myself down to the next to the interchange, and I was able to watch both boxes and the responses of players leaving and entering the game. My overwhelming impression was just how upbeat the Coburg players were and how subdued and clearly unhappy the Casey boys looked. And that's how it transpired over the course of the match. Coburg looked clearly more motivated and purposeful. They moved the ball better, consistently hit targets, and generally were more efficient in their ball use. I heard the Casey coach asking for the players in the last quarter to explode forward, move the ball quickly, and later in the heard him muttering they just weren't doing so. Of the Melbourne players, Howes saw a lot of the ball, gathering 32 disposals, and apart from a clanger or two, seemed too good for the VFL. Tholstrup, with his 9 tackles, 21 disposals plus a goal, tackled hard, and the tackles stuck. But not sure he's quite AFL ready yet, but he has the right attitude, and I still reckon he's an exciting prospect. Jed Adams fought hard, but has some ways to go, really. I was particularly keen to see Jefferson, and he certainly wasn't the worst player out there. Only had the 9 disposals, he kicked 2-2, but the entire Coburg defence operated well and often blanketed Casey's attack. I particularly noted, though, that he's far away from being physically ready for the AFL. He looks like he desperately needs time to develop his upper body strength. But he looks like with time, maybe he can become an AFL player. Laurie was another who battled hard without much impact. 27 disposals, but many were under pressure and not especially useful. Most disappointing of all was Varel. By half-time, he looked gassed and disinterested. Was he perhaps injured? I don't know. Fullerton seemed to ruck as much as Varel over the course of the match. Hi, guys. It's Demonologist again. Sorry I went too long in my last message about the Casey match.
2-minute limit.
If I could just conclude, though, that if Varel is next in line to succeed Gawn as our ruck, this match seemed to suggest Varel is not even close to being ready for seniors football. As for Moniz Wakefield, his 29 disposals suggest that he was busy, and he certainly was with all the pressure put on by Coburg's attack. He moves well, but he's let down by his decision-making, and as George has previously reported, he often gives the ball away far too often. So to sum up, Coburg just seemed to want to win more, and ultimately only Howe put his hand up for possible inclusion in the seniors. So if Melbourne is to bounce back against Collingwood, the improvement is not coming from this playing group, which is a very poor Casey side at the moment. Thanks.
Wow, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
I can learn some brevity from demonologists.
There you go. He did that in 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, bang. I know that. Yeah. That was a fantastic report. Thanks very much for that. That was really comprehensive. You watched the game, George?
Yeah, watched the game, and I'd have to say thanks to demonologists as well. I was had all my notes here and he kept ticking off exactly the things I was going to say.
So have you ever been in the same room as him, George?
No.
No. You're not him as
no,
really.
Maybe. Just a couple of things that I noted. I think, Andy, you should read out the Coburg's history again, just so people get an idea about how bad they are.
So they had won one game this season, 0 games last year, 4 games 2022 and 3 games in 2021.
Yeah. We were pants by this mob, quite frankly, particularly around the ball. On the Varel Fullerton situation, I think what they were under instructions perhaps to play Fullerton in the ruck a lot more to let them see what he was like. He was awful, quite frankly. In the second quarter, they kicked 7 goals to our 1. 6 of those goals came for Coburg came while Fullerton was in the ruck. He was simply non-competitive in any way, shape or form. Varel came in for only a very short period of time. We kicked 1, they kicked 1, but that was the only time that we looked competitive in the middle, because at least he was bringing the ball to our advantage. But while Fullerton was there, it certainly wasn't the case. Absolutely agree with everything else he said. Colt, I think, has got a really good chance of coming in this week. We'll talk about that shortly. He's got that attitude of he never gives up. He keeps going. He really goes in at the ball. He tackles hard. And he's playing in the midfield as well. So, once again, for an 18-year-old kid, that's pretty hard, even at VFL level. But he's certainly showing something. I think he'll get an opportunity very soon, and maybe even this week.
Can I just jump in there, George? Just reading, there was the the report from Taylor Whitfield, the VFL coach, on MFC.com, and just speaking about Colton. And I reckon, speaking of the midfield, he's I see him going into the midfield in the next couple of years. He seems to be ready-made sort of inside mid. 24 disposals, 15 handballs, 5 marks. Yeah. Apologies if you said that. And the comment was, Colt returned to the team following being an emergency the week prior. He played some big minutes as a forward, which is invaluable for his experience and development as a player, which to me is code for he's in as a forward this week. He showed a real understanding of the role. Again, more code, and one we are hoping he continue to develop in the coming weeks, and I suspect that might be at seniors level.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add is that Kynan Brown's had his hair cut.
Yeah, he looks like his dad.
And he looks exactly like his old man. Every possible way, he looks exactly like his old man. So,
and the comment about him was he had another solid performance. His work rate was really high as that small forward, consistently helping our team's defence, which is a good reminder of the connection between the two, whilst having an impact ball in hand. Importantly, he was still able to play some midfield time, so allowing him to showcase his contest work and developing his stoppage craft.
Yeah, it's all about development for people like him and Jefferson and Varel and Adams. They're developing nicely.
A couple of players, George, one that I worry about, to be honest. So it's good to hear Jefferson. I think that comment from Demonologist is spot on. He just needs more time in the gym, doesn't he? It's like compare him to where JVR was. JVR was athletically miles ahead, and but I think that another couple of seasons, or at least a season, another preseason, we'll get a better sense of where Jefferson's ceiling is. 2 players that worry me, to be honest. Well, 3. AMW, it's good to hear him getting numbers, but we don't need another player who turns the ball over. That's we've got enough of them, obviously. But really, the players that worry me are Ollie Seston. He only had 12 disposals, 3 tackles, and that big one for me is Jed Adams. So really sort of high hopes for Jed Adams, but he's had some injury problems, hasn't he? But setbacks. But
look, he was doing all right this week because basically he was the backline.
Yeah, he doesn't have
Randy
that
played
support.
on Tim Member. Oh, no, is that the...
No, Membry plays for Sandy.
Yeah. Oh, right, this was... I'm reading last week's...
Yeah.
Sorry, this is last. That was their the Sandringhams, not this week's one. So.
He doesn't have the support that he would have in the senior team. He's not ready for seniors, but And
you
doesn't have Tomlinson there either. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Injury list. We haven't had the injury report from Sunday's game, but it's safe to assume that Lachie Hunter will be set for an extended stint on the sidelines after being subbed out of the match with a calf injury. It's the same injury that hampered his pre-season, and given his age and the recurrence of that injury, I'd expect that he may be out for a number of weeks. Last week, JVR was the mystery injury of the week when he experienced some minor discomfort in his adductor at training last week. Alan Richardson claims that the club was taking the cautious approach with the injury and therefore he would miss the Alice Springs match, but that they do expect that he will be available to face the Pies on King's birthday.
What injury was it?
Adductor.
If you get two of them, it's a double adductor.
Yeah. So on to the changes for this week. We'll go on the assumption Lachie Hunter's definitely out. I don't think that's an assumption. I think it's safe to assume that.
Thank goodness for that as well.
And that JVR is back in. What other changes are we making for our matchup against the Pies on King's birthday? Bim Man, followed by George.
Well, JVR comes back in, and I have to say, Disco Turner, who I've got a lot of time for, didn't do himself much credit. His body language was appalling, and the 50 he gave away, I hate when players give away 50 and then carry on with the umpire. It was a bit tough, but it's like, come on, get your head in the game. It was late in the game too. He had no impact whatsoever, so he'll come out for JVR, you'd expect. It'll be really interesting to see this week. I think Colt will come in. I hope he comes in for McAdam. I really do. I think that McAdam hasn't given us anything, and that would be the sort of selection that would frustrate a player like Colt who's working hard, or Wowie. Wowie's not been able to get a regular 22 spot, despite the fact that surely he gives more. He's been giving more effort than say McAdam. That's a big risk when you start. When selection integrity becomes a question mark, I think it's hard for those players like Wowie and Laurie to front up every week. I think Tomlinson will probably stay in, but I think we saw one of the challenges for him in the side that he needs a player who he matches up on well. So I'm not sure if Mychek. No,
he's not. Doesn't look like it.
He's a possible. I would say.
Ash Johnson.
Yeah, Ash Johnson will be too quick for Tomo. Yeah. So there's not a real natural. He'll stay in, won't he? But that's part of the problem with May and Tomo. I don't like them both in the same side because May is looking a bit sort of hampered at the moment too. Maybe it's mid-season, the tough load and all of that. But I don't know who would come in, but I wouldn't be shocked if Tomo gets dropped. I probably would be. So we'll definitely JVR in. I think McAdam out. I think Howes was dropped in terms of that mental stuff and not pushing through the sort of barrier. So, but I wonder whether he comes back in. So, it was interesting hearing Demonologist's comments that he was the only player who sort of was banging down the door. So I'll take a line through that and Howes in potentially. I'm not sure what that means. I'd really like to see Wowie in the starting 23. I reckon he's deserved. I don't know. He wasn't that good in this game, though, I have to say, when he came on, but no one was. So, maybe he takes Hunter's spot on the wing, or Langdon goes back to the wing, and then you use Wowie as a half forward instead. You put, as George notes, you put everyone back in the positions that they're best at, and you set up for a brutal finals-like game, and maybe this is the sort of must-win game that Goody will decide to play with that. So I hope Wowie comes into the 22. I think Colt comes in for McAdam. JVR comes in for Turner.
You're missing
one more.
Lachie Hunter going out. So George's favourite player.
Hunter.
What about George's favourite player, Jack Billings?
And then Laurie comes in would be the other one. Would be the sort of logical. it depends. He might. We'll get a sense of where Goodwin's how much. Where his thinking is in terms of the team, I reckon, in terms of mentally, and because he could, if he drops some players this week, you bring in a Brown, you bring in a Tholstrup, I think he could. It'd be interesting to see if he uses selection to make a statement. But yeah, I'd bring Wowie in for Hunter and Laurie onto the bench, though Laurie doesn't ever seem to perform well off the sub either. So.
The other question that everyone's forgotten about is Lever available this week?
I thought he's 6 weeks, wasn't it?
Well, it still said didn't it say still 3 to 4 weeks last week? So
well, surely they'll use the bye. I thought that was the plan, is to have the surgery and then he comes back after the bye.
Yeah. I'd agree with most of those other ones. I think we'll see Tolstrup in. He was really putting it in the Casey game, unlike a lot of others. So that's what we really needed in the Alice Springs game, is got people who are prepared to put in, and he was certainly showing that. How's for Tomo? Tomo, I think, unfortunately, he is a one-on-one backman. He just can't play zone defence.
And he's not quick enough the mark either.
No, I remember in this game, May was furious with him at one point because he didn't come in over the top, which is what Lever does all the time. May was holding his man down. Tomo just stood at the back holding his man down. That was great, except that...
then it becomes a one-on-one contest.
And that's not how we play. Yeah. So I'd like to see Woden in and getting a decent run. McAdam out, have to agree with that. The only other one that I thought might be a real left field one, and Monty's Wakefield maybe playing as a forward instead of McAdam. They've been playing him down back, but he played forward last year.
Well, he certainly went forward, didn't he?
Yeah, we certainly need something more than what McAdam's been providing. We certainly need something more than what Hunter was providing on the wing. Please don't pick Billings. Please don't pick Billings.
I think he might be in.
How did he play?
He wasn't.
He didn't. He was
an emergency.
No, was he injured or was he emergency? Did he go up to Alice Springs?
Don't know.
He was fit, so why? If he wasn't in the Coburg game. The other one, Chandler, he's had a number of quiet weeks, hasn't he? So he really needs to step up to the plate if Cozzy, particularly when Cozzy's spending 16, 17, 18, 20, centre bouncer tendencies. You need then, it goes to your point, Andy, as well, of you put Nibbler on ball and you can't have two. Suddenly we need two Nibblers, and who would have thought that 2 years ago?
And look, Spargo also used to play that high half forward role.
Yeah. Where's that injury-wise? What was the injury?
Now he's TBC. He was 2 to 3 weeks. He was 2 to 3 weeks for about 10 weeks. And now he's
and with our training regime this year, I think TBC is to be cooked.
Yeah. So Achilles take a long time to recover from.
Yeah, they're my Achilles heel.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the preview. Demons return to the MCG on Monday for the annual King's Birthday matchup against the Pies, which also marks the 10th anniversary of the Big Freeze fundraiser for Fight MMD. So buy your beanie if you haven't already. The injury-riddled Pies will be missing a raft of stars, including Jordan DeGoey, Tom Mitchell, Jamie Elliott, Brody Myercheck, and I just checked. It said Brody Myercheck's still 2 to 4 weeks away, and that was last week, so that's with a hamstring, so I doubt he'll play. And Mason Cox, who usually...
He'll probably still kick 6 goals against us.
Mason Cox, he always not in the... Yeah, he bashes into Max and then kicks a couple of goals.
Not Cox.
He won't be there.
Myercheck, even if he's not playing, he'll kick 6 goals against us.
So both teams find themselves sitting outside the 8 and will be desperate to win this game to keep their finals hopes alive. We've got a voicemail from Noah, and then you guys can give your preview of the match and how we're going to bounce back from the embarrassing loss against the Dockers to knock off the Magpies. George, you follow. George, you start it, followed by Bimman after Noah.
Just really, really worried about how we played against Fremantle. Really concerned about our chance of getting into, basically the final 8 this year. And we've got some tough games coming up, especially against Collingwood. And I know with Collingwood we have some payback to avenge, especially against a certain Mr. Maynard. Just want to know how we're going to go against the Pies, how we're going to beat them if we're going to be playing like this. This is just not good enough. But how does Melbourne expect to perform and do well against the tough teams if this is how we're going to play against supposedly average side Dockers? Love the podcast, love the Ds. As always, go Melbourne, go Redlegs.
So, George, how are we going to beat the Pies?
If we play like we did against Fremantle, we will not beat the Pies. It's quite simple. And I think the important thing is, as been mandated before, we need to make a statement this week based on the performance of the previous week. The players do, the coaches do. Everybody needs to make a statement about where we stand, and in a way, the opportunity is there with Collingwood. Collingwood's got a horrible injury list, but they're playing with a lot of vigour and a lot of team spirit. The good thing is Pendlebury's also out this week.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that's a great thing. DeGoey out is also a real big positive for us because those were two of the guys who basically won them the premiership last year. They're playing some pretty ordinary football compared to what they were earlier on and certainly last year. So in a way, though, I think they're a little bit ripe for the taking. We couldn't wish for a better team with their injury list to come up against. With a full list, I think we'd really struggle given our own injuries problems and personnel problems. So we're in with a chance, but like the Fremantle game, I suspect we'll know within the first 5 minutes about how we're going to play.
Well, the first 5 minutes of the Fremantle game, we were 2 goals up. I thought we were going to win.
It'll be really curious to see how Macrae play because I think they will look to stretch us. They won't want to get into a forward half game. They've been playing a forward half game in the last 3-4 weeks. In the last sort of 5 games, they're getting their numbers back to somewhere near where their numbers were mid last year in terms of their turnovers. They're really getting that part of their game in better shape. The scores from back half are improved. Their scores from turnover are improved. They've got a really terrible injury toll, which sets up terribly also for a loss because, I think that with good reason, if we lose to them next week with that injury, then it does definitely change the season. And a practical thing about this loss was not just leaving aside how horrible we played, was losing so much percentage. It was just woeful for our chances of finishing top 4, but it brings in sides like Collingwood because with the 2 draws they've had, now percentages back in play for them. Massive game for a number of reasons. So, much bigger game. If we'd won that game on the weekend and even played scrappy to do so, there's a lot riding on this game. I'm not going to go anywhere near media this week, but, Melbourne deserve to get caned in the media, and I'm sure we will. So they'll build that up. It'll be, the redemption. That'll be the whole discussion around Gus, and it's going to really be triggering for me as I've talked about how awful I found that match last year. So there's going to be a really emotional game. As I noted before, I suspect that we will revert and play a more sort of Melbourne-style, Goodwin-style game next week as much as anything to go in hard. There'll be obviously an emphasis on winning the contest. Presumably they will have set themselves for this game, hopefully. I'm hoping, given we've got the bye the following week. So, hopefully that they're in optimal shape or as best shape we can be given. I think I agree with Buckley that we're not fit, but that's, when you aren't optimally fit, you have to even more emphasis on targeting particular matches. So I'm really hoping we've targeted this match. As both of you just said, we'll know 10 minutes in. Even though we started all right in that game, Andy, on the weekend, it wasn't as if we were brilliant. They just were, their pressure was miles off Freo, and ours was just average. As soon as they turned the wick up, we were gone. So we'll know 10, 15 minutes in. I think we'll really look to get inside 50s, trap it inside 50s, so that maybe that does bring a player like Colt into the equation in terms of, pressure up forward, and maybe you can run him through the middle as well instead of Cozzy, pressure up forward from Coz. And I can expect them to really spread the game because it's not just their injuries. They've got a lot of younger players in the side, Collingwood, who they'll want to keep out of the contest. So I expect Macrae will look to do what Freo did and stretch us, really look to take advantage. All the clubs would know each other's fitness levels. Like there'd be no mystery at AFL level. So if there's any question marks about our fitness, interestingly, it's exactly what Brisbane did. It's exactly what West Coast did. It's exactly what Freo did, which is use uncontested marks to spread us and to exacerbate, make us run. I think Collingwood will do the same. I hope we get him in the trenches, and I'm hoping we do revert back to that 21, 22, 23 game style, at least to an extent, and we really need to win the game.
That we do. All right. I'm going to leave it there for tonight, and we'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live then, please head on over to demonland.com on Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. So thank you to Ben. Thank you to our voicemailers, Salty, Roadstar, Enzo, Adam from North Brisbane, Demonologist, and Noah. Thank you to our caller, Kieran from Canberra, and thank you to everyone who left questions and comments. They do form an integral part of the show. So thank you to the Dreamland posters who submitted those questions and comments. Thank you to Newport 34, At the Break of Dawn, Scroll, Clintosaurus, What Say What, Oh My D's, Flower Magic, Doug Reamer, Dino Rover, Lefty, D Positive, Garbo, Radish, D, Travy 14, Lazy, Bates Mate, Bigfoot, Picket Fence, Delirium, Track Forever, Pipe Fitter, Pingu, Jane02, Royal Demon, El Diablo 14, Bucknecker, Demon Jack, Demons 1, Red Jacket Man, DeLorean, NPC, Everd, and Swooper Northy. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bin Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and I'll read it out on the show next week. And Bin Man,
and thanks to all of the people in the chat room. So Why You Little, Doug Reamer, Tolstoy's Nudge, Johnny Karate, Dutch Demons, and Murdoch 516, and I said Doug Reamer.
All right. Well, thank you to all of those guys as well. We really do appreciate it. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on.